The corporate media in the United States is aggressively pushing for expanding the Western proxy war on Russia. And this story really shows how the media in the US is not independent from the government. It constantly advances the interests of the most hawkish right wing of the US political class. But the story also shows how extremely corrupt the corporate media is, and how pundits in the corporate media constantly push for the US government to give contracts to the corporations that they themselves invest in, and they encourage their viewers to invest in. So this story really exposes how the Western war machine, the US military-industrial complex, is built on death and suffering and pure corruption and rot. And today I'm talking about how CNBC published a video segment calling for cyber terrorism on Russia, openly insisting that the US military should be carrying out, quote, cyber terrorism on Russia. They use the word terrorism. That's not my word, that's their word.
And if you wanted to find a way to create a sanction, find a way to be able to reprogram their missiles through cyber terrorism.
And furthermore, CNBC pundit Jim Cramer called for giving a, quote, blank check. He said that the U.S. government should give a, quote, blank check to for-profit private weapons corporations, specifically Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. And what a coincidence. This CNBC pundit, Jim Cramer, constantly encourages his viewers to invest in those very same companies that he says the U.S. government should give a blank check to in order to arm Ukraine.
Why don't we give a blank check to Raytheon and to Lockheed Martin to help them?
So not only is he calling for expanding this war that is leading to thousands of deaths and fueling inflation and economic crisis around the world, he's also doing it in a way that he can personally profit from and his viewers can profit from. Once again, this just shows the cynicism and the corruption and rot in the US media. Now, I published an article about this over at Multipolarista.com, and this is an article that was written by a friend and contributor, Amar Ahmad, and the article is titled, CNBC Calls for Cyber Terrorism Against Russia and Blank Check for U.S. Weapons Corporations. Again, this is by Amar Ahmad, who's a good activist from Massachusetts, a peace activist. And what I'm going to do here in this video is I'm going to go through some of the main clips of this interview that CNBC pundit Jim Cramer did on June 27th. And the CNBC segment is titled, Jim Cramer Explains Why He Thinks Every Russian Sanction Has Failed. Now, for people who don't know, Jim Cramer is a former hedge fund manager, and he got his start working for Goldman Sachs, one of the most corrupt, infamous banks in the entire world. And he runs something at CNBC called the Investing Club. And he is paid money by CNBC to tell viewers and listeners what companies they should invest in. And obviously, CNBC and Cramer himself encourage certain companies that they also invest in. So this is a clear example of corruption, encouraging people to invest in the very same companies that he also invests in. And in this June 27th interview on CNBC, he complained, basically, shedding these crocodile tears, that Western sanctions on Russia have, quote, failed. They failed to destroy Russia's economy. He was complaining about this. And he said that the reason is because as long as India and China buy Russia's oil, it doesn't matter. The Western sanctions won't work. And he also complained, he said this is a bad thing, that the ruble is strong. That's the Russian currency. So he obviously wants the currency to be weak, which obviously hurts average Russian people. There's over 100 million Russians who use the ruble as their currency. He complained that the ruble is strong, although he did boast that Western sanctions have eliminated a huge part of Russia's GDP. Here's that clip.
Well, now, yes, there is a huge part of the GDP has been eliminated because of our pullout. But I would say that every single sanction has failed.
Has failed?
Every single one. Because there is no sign that they are going to stop.
So because Western sanctions have failed to destroy Russia's economy, instead, the CNBC pundit and former hedge fund manager proposes terrorism. Literally, he uses the word terrorism. He says that if you want to find a way to create a sanction, find a way to be able to reprogram Russia's missiles through cyber terrorism. And he says that the US military should reprogram Moscow's missiles so they either reverse and they hit Russia or they malfunction. So he's saying that carry out cyber terrorism. And then he says we should have everybody who is in the army working, anybody who has potential to do cyber, to reprogram Russia's missiles. And again, he calls that cyber terrorism. Here's the excerpt.
And if you wanted to find a way to create a sanction, find a way to be able to reprogram their missiles through cyber terrorism. I mean, we should have everybody in our who's in the army working, and anybody who has potential to do cyber, to reprogram those missiles.
So this is an example of how the corporate media is not informing people in the United States. It's encouraging more war. It's calling on the U.S. government and other Western governments to escalate the war, the proxy war on Russia. And as I'll get to later in this video, he also is attacking people who want peace. Jim Cramer, the CNBC pundit, is attacking people who propose a peaceful resolution of the proxy war in Ukraine. But let me get here now to the example of the extreme corruption of the corporate media and CNBC. Because while he's calling for the U.S. to escalate the proxy war on Russia, he's calling for a blank check to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, the very same corporations that he encourages people to invest in. And in this interview, he insists that the Western financial sanctions on Russia have failed, so the only real sanction is to send every single piece of artillery that Ukraine needs, that Zelensky would tell you that they need. So he's saying, send as many weapons as humanly possible to Ukraine. And then he gets really angry and he says, where are the new javelins? Why isn't the United States sending them thousands of javelins? Now, the U.S. is sending javelins, but he's complaining that they're not sending the newest javelins. Of course, what are javelins? Javelins they're an anti-tank missile system. And who builds them? Drum roll, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. And then he says that the U.S. government should provide a blank check to what companies? Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. So once again, he is calling for the U.S. government to give endless contracts to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, who create the Javelin missile system. Here's this clip.
But you're saying there is no sanction that is really tenable at this point.
The only sanction is to send every single piece of artillery that they need, that Zelensky would tell you that they need. But where are the new javelins? Why isn't the United States sending them thousands of javelins? Why are they still stuck with Stingers from the 70s? Why don't we do what we would do for any ally, which is to send them the current Stingers? Why don't we give a blank check to Raytheon and to Lockheed Martin to help them?
So why is CNBC's pundit Jim Cramer singling out Raytheon and Lockheed Martin specifically as corporations that the U.S. government should give a, quote, blank check to? Well, surprise, surprise, he constantly encourages viewers to buy stocks in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Back in May, just a few weeks ago, CNBC published a segment titled, Jim Cramer Says Investors Should Have These 4 Defense Stocks on Their Shopping Lists. And surprise, surprise, what are the top 2 companies on this list of the companies that he insists that people should invest in? Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. So there you go. He's been for many months now encouraging people to invest in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. This is Mad Money, which is the section of CNBC hosted by Jim Cramer. And listen to some of these quotes. I mean, these are sociopathic quotes. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February, he was positively salivating over the possibility of making money. He was so happy about this war in Ukraine. Jim Cramer, again, former hedge fund manager, CNBC pundit, he said, quote, "There's at least one industry that's booming right now, and it'll keep booming regardless of what happens with the Federal Reserve in particular or the U.S. economy in general. I'm talking about the defense industry, which is on fire." He said that the weapons industry is on fire. And then he added, quote, "The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a game changer for the defense industry, and you'd really have to be clueless not to notice." So he's saying that it's a game changer. The war in Ukraine is a huge opportunity to make money by investing in these death profiteers, in these private for-profit weapons corporations. And of course, he's encouraging the US government to give a blank check to those corporations. Now, this is not new. He constantly uses his platform to encourage people to invest in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Here's an interview from July 2021. Cramer, "Raytheon is extraordinarily strong," he says. Extraordinarily strong. Here is another interview this is from September. Cramer's lightning round. "Raytheon Technologies is a buy." So again, invest in Raytheon. Here's an interview from July 2020. "Raytheon and Honeywell are good stocks in aerospace." So once again, buy Raytheon stocks, he's telling his viewers. And here's yet another one from February 2020. Cramer, "You've got to own Raytheon." So once again, this is the same pundit who is telling people to invest in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and he's calling on the US government to give a blank check to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and calling for escalating the war in Ukraine that he can make money off of. And here is another example. Once again, this is CNBC. This is from November, just a few months ago. Jim Cramer did an interview, a very friendly softball interview with who? The CEO of Lockheed Martin, Jim Takelet. So this is pure corruption. This is someone using his platform on network TV in the US to encourage people to invest in corporations that he is likely investing in as well if he follows his own advice, and then telling the US government to give those corporations blank checks that he and his audience are going to profit from. This is not journalism. This is not news. This is pure corruption. That's what the corporate media is. It constantly calls for more war and for accelerating and expanding the military-industrial complex and the war machine and U.S. imperialism. Now, meanwhile, while the CNBC pundit is calling for a blank check for the companies he invests in the military-industrial complex, he's also attacking people who want peace, who want a diplomatic resolution to the war in Ukraine. Here, he attacks the idea of peace. He says, quote, "There's another school of thought which says that there is a peace deal being worked on." And then he attacks the idea of a peace deal. And he says that would be a, quote, sellout of Zelensky. And then he stresses, if you don't give Zelensky what he needs, he will lose. And of course, when he says what he needs, he means more weapons from the companies he's encouraging people to invest in. So here's this clip.
There's another school of thought which says there's a peace deal being worked on right now. That seems like a sellout of Zelensky peace deal, leader of Ukraine.
So there you have it. Attacking people who want peace, calling for more war, and calling for enriching the military-industrial complex. In another part of the interview, the host, who's just as hawkish and warmongering as this pundit, Jim Cramer, the host talks about NATO's proposal to put 300,000 troops in high readiness positions. And then, of course, what is Cramer's response? Yes, they better. He's pushing for more war. Here's this clip.
You got a NATO saying we're going to put 300,000 troops in high readiness positions.
Well, they better.
Yeah.
They better. They've been doing better protect Poland.
So once again, more war, more escalation. That's always what the response is. More escalation and more war, never peace. In fact, they attack people who want peace. And then here is an extremely unhinged part of this video where this CNBC pundit basically is completely dismissive of the idea of nuclear war. He's unconcerned about the possibility of escalating this proxy war into nuclear war. And then he fearmongers, saying that if Russia's not defeated, it's going to allow other countries in the global south to have nuclear weapons. And then he fearmongers about Pakistan and Iran. And by the way, Iran does not have nuclear weapons. And Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has issued a fatwa, a religious ruling against nuclear weapons, saying that they're not compatible with Islam. So this is just blatant Islamophobic fear-mongering about Muslim countries having nuclear weapons. Here's this insane clip.
I do believe that if the West lets them get away with this, then anyone who goes nuclear has us over a barrel. I mean, if we decide that we have to be fearful of every nuclear nation, well, we're going to be fearful of Pakistan. We'll be fearful of Iran. We will make deals with countries that we have no choice. This has to stop.
And then finally, Ammar Ahmad concluded his article over at multipolarista.com, noting that actual military experts, not Jim Cramer, who is a former hedge fund banker, this guy is not an expert on military matters or foreign policy at all in any way. He's an expert in trying to make money in stocks and investments, which is basically just legalized gambling. I mean, so what are real military experts saying? Ammar Ahmad, in the end of this article, he quotes Scott Ritter, who's a former UN arms inspector and a U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. And Ritter wrote in an article in Consortium News, a great independent outlet, he said, quote, "No matter what the U.S. and NATO do in terms of serving as Ukraine's arsenal, Russia is going to win the war. The longer the war continues, the more Ukrainians will die." But of course, former hedge fund managers and bankers at CNBC, pundits like Jim Cramer, they're not concerned with killing Ukrainians. They're not concerned with fueling this war that has led to thousands of deaths. They don't want peace. They want the U.S. government to give a blank check. In his words, a blank check. They want the U.S. government to carry out cyber terrorism against Russia. They want to enrich the military-industrial complex and the corporations they are investing in. And, okay, if Ukrainians have to die for them, that's a price worth paying. They're not dying. Their friends and loved ones aren't dying. And if people around the world have to suffer from inflation and an economic crisis caused by the Western sanctions on Russia, well, so be it. For them, that's another price worth paying because they're cashing in from their investments.